Well, you all got so quiet so quickly. Not like my students. Welcome everyone to this symposium. It's being recorded. There's a lot going on in people's lives right now, but we really want to aim to make this as a statement, a kind of definitive statement on where we've been, where we're going, regarding the LD 291, the Maine Indian History and Culture Law. To begin today, I asked Ambassador William to do a welcome for us.
Good morning. Welcome. On behalf of the Penobscot Nation, it's really an honor to be here to participate today, getting to present with some of my favorite people. I'm related to a bunch of them, and to get to hear their expertise on this. I am always thankful for the mentorship I have from these strong women leaders in my life. My great aunt, Donna Loring, when she was the representative, was able to pass this law. And when you think about it, the role of the Penobscot representative being able to get any legislation through, especially something like this, is truly groundbreaking, and we really owe it to the legacy of the law to come together and make it really work the way it's supposed to. So I think this is an awesome event to be having. Thank you to the university, which occupies Penobscot territory, so it's very appropriate to be speaking on this here today. In my activism experience around Indian mascots and changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly about the education systems of Maine, and how a little bit of awareness and teaching that just basic humanity about Indigenous people can change a lot of hearts and minds, and that's where the policy changes often go, is when we can reach out as fellow human beings. So welcome. It's lovely to see all of you here. Thank you, Dr. Rinko, and all the presenters today. Welcome.
So I actually didn't introduce myself. I think everyone here knows me. I'm Darren Reckon. I'm chair of Native American programs at the University of Maine. And this event is marking a particular moment in time. Over the last year, Native American programs working with the College of Education has been lucky enough to have Dr. Rebecca Suckbasin as a visiting Libra professor. And her work has really been dedicated to thinking through laws like this and how to best implement them, especially into faculties of education in the Canadian context. But her work is just so inspiring to how we could think about doing that in the context here at the University of Maine as well. So it's definitely marking that space, and it's also marking a space where the commissioner of the State Board of Education has reformulated a committee to address the issues in the LD 291 law. So there is also renewed interest and action, and I think commitments from the state to actually do better at implementing and understanding what the barriers are to more fully implementing this law and creating a better set of resources for teachers to actually do this work. So when Rebecca and I are the ones that kind of mastermind the idea of what a symposium might look like. So past, present, and future is sort of how I want to think about this morning and our time together. For us, we'll start with Donna Loring, who Mullion already mentioned is very responsible for the origins and the drafting of the law, and sort of can really speak to its intent. So we'll start with a little bit of the past, although Donna's very involved in the contemporary, the present pieces of it. And then we'll have a panel of folks, many of whom are listed here, who've been, in one way or another, very involved in the implementation of this law. And there's a lot of Penobscots represented here, so I apologize to the other tribes. There are other tribal folks who've been involved in this. I've been trying quite a bit to get Donald and others to come to this event, but luckily they're part of the broad tribal representation in the committee that the state is organizing. So I wanted to recognize the other tribes and in that kind of context. So I think I will just now turn it over to Donna to talk about why this law, why are we kind of here today, and what was its intent, and maybe like any law, it had went through changes and different ideas and reflections, and she's so good at telling like really what it's about. So Donna.
Good morning. I'm the has-been. So I'll talk to you about how this originated. And it got signed actually in June of 2001. And on that day, I couldn't believe it was going to happen until I had breakfast at the Blaine House with the governor and a bunch of other legislators that morning. And he said to me, you think I'm going to sign this? I said, I hope you're going to sign it. And he said, yeah, I'm going to sign it. So, but it was a journey for about a year before that and a little bit prior to. And it all started when I realized that people, I had a journalist who came up to me from Portland, and she said, Donna, I just took a survey at the Dunkin', like a talking survey to people at the Dunkin' Donuts in Portland. I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. She said, well, I asked people at large, were there any Indians in Maine? And she said, some of them said no. She said, and others said, yeah, I think there's at least one tribe. And when she asked, well, okay, what tribes? And they would always say Penobscot, or they would say maybe two, but they really didn't know. And I thought, wow, we've got a generation of children growing up not knowing Maine's history, not knowing the intricacies and the contributions that the Maine Indian people have actually contributed to the state of Maine. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a bill, and I'm going to make that mandatory, make that learning experience mandatory in all of Maine schools. Well, when I went around to the legislators and asked about doing that, their response was, well, Donna, that's not going to work, because there's one representative who's passed, but she really did a lot for Maine tribes. She had tried to put in a multicultural bill 2 years in a row and got turned down because the response was, the teachers have such a high workload that they just don't want any more to teach. So I said, well, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And of course, back then, and even now, well, the tribal reps we had no vote. What we did have was the art of persuasion and hoping that people would be fair about things and also see the good of this particular bill. So I decided to go ahead with it. I had it written. I consulted with Judy Lucarelli, who was the deputy commissioner at the time. And between her and I, we figured out the language of the bill. And I think and learning results was sort of going parallel to that. And the thought, as we moved in front of the Education Committee, was that we might just meld the Indian History Bill into learning results. So that was a topic of conversation, and learning results is going to cost the state megabucks. And back then, even now, if you put a mandatory preamble on your bill, that means that the state is going to be responsible for paying 90% of that cost. So as the bill went forward, we had a lot of people in theory saying, yeah, that's a good idea, but it's gonna cost a lot of money and the teachers don't have time to teach it. And so in the meantime, I'm going to every person and trying to get this bill through. And then, to top it all off, the Maine MPBN editorial guy, at that time was Fred Nutter, came on and spoke against the bill. So I thought, oh my goodness, I'll never get this through. And then I was invited to Wisconsin because I'll bring it together here. I was invited to Wisconsin to talk about Maine tribes in the legislature and their position and if it was working and how so or whatever. And they also said, well, we want someone from the other side of the aisle too. So at that time it was a guy named William Schneider, Bill Schneider, who later became the Attorney General. But at that time, Bill and I went to Wisconsin. We got along together really well. We became friends and whatever. And both of us had the same perspective that this was a good thing, that tribal representation was sitting in the House. So we got back, and again, I started to talk to the commission, the education committee. And at that time, and probably even now, the education committee, you couldn't get a unanimous out of that committee for anything, because they were always at each other. So I took them one at a time. I talked to them. Two of them I thought, I'll never get those guys. But one of them I did. And Carol Weston, she was later the in the Senate. And she agreed. And then I had one more left. And I could not move this guy. I had to get a unanimous out of this committee. Couldn't move him. And I went to Bill, because Bill was the minority whip in the House. And I said, Bill, can you help me with this? Can you talk to this guy? And Bill said, sure, I will. And the next week, I got a unanimous out of that committee. It didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of persuasion, a lot of talk, and 5-minute elevator talks, because everybody had their thing they were doing, and things moved fast. So we got the bill during the committee hearings. Here's another thing. The chair of the education committee, I think her name was Richardson, whatever. She said, I think you should put your bill into the learning results. And I'd been thinking about it, and I heard a lot of controversy going on about that learning results bill. And of course I knew, my first year or whatever, and so they said, well, what do you say? You want to put that bill in with the learning results? I said, no, I don't. I would like that bill to stand alone and just have its separate law. And everybody looked at me kind of like I had 3 heads, and they said, well, why is that? And they said, well, what if your law doesn't pass on its own? And I said, well, I'm thinking, what if the learning results doesn't pass? And they kind of laughed about that, and they said, okay. So as things progressed, the learning results did pass. My bill passed. But that, you would think that if it passes in the House and in the Senate, that's the end of it, it's done, all it needs is the governor's signature. Wrong. Because, and even today, if you have a bill that passes, it has to go to appropriations. And if that bill gets put on the table in appropriations, it's a dead bill. Because they do it because of expense. Well, I purposely had the word required put into my bill, because if I use the word mandate, that would kill the bill. So there was a back and forth in appropriations about this. Because I was new to the system, someone came up to me and said, hey, your bill's in appropriations. I said, well, yeah, so? They said, well, you know, if you don't get in there and say something about that bill, it's gonna die. I said, oh, okay. So I went in, and they were going back and forth over this bill. One of the representatives wanted to take the History Commission out of the bill. They wanted to just gut the bill. And in the meantime, I'm sending Mary Cathcart, Senator Cathcart, because she was a co-chair at the time, messages like, Mary, you can't help me out here. You know, you can't let them do this. It's the whole crux of the bill. And then there was Representative Goldthwait, who, she was tough, really tough. She was out of Ellsworth, Bar Harbor area. And Jill, she didn't vote a lot for Native stuff. And she was, I think she was the chair. And she said to the committee, she said, you know, this bill passed the Education Committee unanimously. And what bill does that? She said, you know, we don't want to second guess that what's already been looked at and gone over and people testified to this. There was a funny thing, because at the hearing of this bill, the Education Committee hearing, there was not one person testifying against this bill. And there was like, they said at that time it was one of the biggest crowds in a room to testify. And when the chair of the committee asked if there was anyone, and the pros went, I think, for 4 hours for the bill. And when it came to testifying against the bill, she said, is there anyone here who wishes to testify against the bill? And there was this voice in the back of the room saying, are you kidding, lady? So, you know, it came out of that, came out unanimous. We got it through the appropriations, even though there were some senators who really tried hard to gut it and to kill it. And it surprised me because one of the Democratic guy from the House voted against the bill in appropriations. But it passed anyway, so it got through. And later that day, I got him in the corner. I was mad. And I basically said, expletive deletives here. I said, you know, what were you doing? You know, why did you vote against this bill? And he goes, well, Donna, you know, it was going to cost a lot of money, and there just wasn't enough detail. I said, look, you passed the learning results bill, didn't you? Yes, we did. I said, how much did that cost? Well, did you know the details about that bill? No. I said, well, you know, that's the issue here. Every time there's an Indian bill that goes through here, it gets put under a freaking microscope, and that is not fair. And he kind of like stepped back and he goes, I never thought about that. He says, is there something I can do now? I said, no, there's nothing you can do now. It's finished. But I just, you know, keep that in mind for future bills. So we did, and it came to the signing, and it was at this breakfast. And prior to that, there was a Maine Indian Tribal State Commission meeting, and Angus was at this meeting. And there was TV cameras there and whatever. And I made a point to ask Governor King, I said, "Are you going to support the education bill?" And he said, "Yes, I am." Great. So at that breakfast, I said, "Now, Angus, you remember what you said about that bill on camera." So anyway, it was not easy, very difficult. But we did get it through. We had the Indian History Commission that was created. Rebecca, Dr. Sockbasin was on that commission. John Bear was on that commission. James, of course, James was like, he was writing everything down and helped out a lot with that. So that commission was a resource and it was a tool. But then again, you know, I had spent so much of my time on this bill, I was exhausted. So once it got passed and the commission was formed, I just kind of stepped back and just let it go. And it just kind of, after a while, it just kind of fizzled out and nobody pushed for things. But coming up to present, I happen to be advisor on tribal affairs, senior advisor on tribal affairs for the governor. And we are moving forward. We are making sure that this Indian history, Maine Indian history, is being taught in the schools. And there's a website that has a lot of material on it right now. There's a committee that's being formed, that has been formed out of Department of Education, and it's working really hard to get things going and to figure out how to proceed in the best way. So that's where we are now. So.
Donna rushed off stage. We do have time for some questions. But before we do that, I wanted to read some of the text of the law, which includes Maine Native American history and culture must be taught in all elementary and secondary schools. Sorry, this is an old person thing, I realize. Maine Native American history and culture must be taught in all elementary and secondary schools, both public and private. Maine Native American history and culture must be included in, but is not limited to, the areas of social studies and modern classical languages. And then there's, part of the rulemaking section, there's more detail about what the standard subject areas of social studies are and how it applies to this law. And so there are 4 sections related to that. Maine tribal governments and political systems and their relationships with local, state, national, and international governments. Maine Native American cultural systems and the experience of Maine tribal people throughout history. Maine Native American territories, and Maine Native American economic systems. And Donna also referenced the commission that was created to support the implementation of the law. And needless to say, it provided a really clear pathway that tribal folks with sort of equal representation, a little bit more than equal representation, representing each of the tribal nations here in Maine, be a part of this commission and to think through the curriculum and to implement it. So the commission's important because she mentioned John Barrett and Rebecca being part of the representatives from the Penobscot Nation, but each of the tribe had a couple of representatives, and then the convener of the commission was someone who used to work here at the University of Maine, Maureen Smith, who was chair of Native American Studies, so director of Native American Studies. I apologize. So just edification for edification purposes, like that's what the law we're talking about. I've heard some of those stories that you mentioned, Donna, before, but some things I hadn't heard. Are there questions for Donna on sort of the history or intent of the law? Because we have a little bit of
Yeah,
time.
I thought the questions were gonna be during the panel,
Oh,
so that's why I
That's okay.
left, but,
Why don't you do it?
yeah, okay, so,
If you wanna keep doing, it's just for the.
yeah, okay. That law was written in a specific way, it's very different, and it was one of the most, or the most, I don't know, what, I think they can hear me though.
That's all right.
It was the most comprehensive Indian history law in the country. And I even think, I'm not going to say this for sure, but I think it was the first one. I'm not sure about that, maybe Montana, but I think it was one of the first. And we did that on purpose. We didn't just say history. We put it in all of these other fields to give the teachers options, and also to be able to make it so that it would be used in all grade levels, not just, like, I don't know, a certain specific grade in high school or in history or whatever, but that the teacher could decide, different teachers, like how can we use this in our environmental class or our math class, or figure out how to do that. So it was a very progressive and very unique law in certain respects.
Other questions?
I thought that you had said that you deliberately changed the preamble not to say
Mandatory.
mandatory, but required, and so that it wouldn't run into that stumbling thing about
90%.
90%. But it sounds like, in spite of that, you were making an issue in the
But because-
appropriations committee about
Yes.
paying for it. So I don't understand that.
Well, neither did I. And that's why I screamed at the rep. I do want to recognize Representative Rena Newton. Passamaquoddy tribe just came in.
I always have trouble when I come on campus.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Maybe this will come up in the panel also, but at the time when you were keeping it separate from the learning results, but if the learning results include, and I don't understand the learning results, so I'm ignorant of them, but if the learning results, like if the state says, well, you have to have this knowledge, like it's part of the learning results, not that this law would be melded with learning results, but if the learning results honored this law, then teachers would be more motivated, more obligated. I just would like you to speak about that a little bit.
Sure. That was an option. But the one thing it was my first, it's fairly new legislation. Didn't know much about how that system worked. I did know that I wanted to get this through without complication, and I wanted to get it through so that it would be recognized on its own and not homogenized into something else. So the result was we did get that through. Eventually, I believe, John Barrett can talk to this later, but I think it did get homogenized into the learning results, I think. But that's another thing that the Department of Education is working on right now, is working on trying to figure out how we can have something for the certification for teachers. But it's in progress. It's nothing changes quickly in this state. Nothing. Yes, Elizabeth, my sister Beth.
Donna, is this something that the commission could work on to make this not mandatory, so that they can teach in different stages, like in elementary, grammar, elementary, high school, so that they're gonna have something to go by. Right now, I mean, I guess it's kind of, it's not taught that well. I remember when it first became active, there were teachers from all over Maine that was coming to the university that summer to really learn about this bill. So maybe the commission could pick up the ball.
Yeah, the education committee will be looking at that and trying to figure out the best way to get this going in the school.
No, sorry.
Okay. I was gonna say, this is something else. Okay, old age kicking in here.
Other questions? If you use the mic, it's like a, close to it, sorry.
Good morning. Donna, I've often heard you talk about how this bill was linked to misunderstandings in Augusta when you were trying to push through the offensive place names bill. Is that, am I correct about that?
There was, I'm not sure, is there a particular,
Well, I recall you talking about how when you were trying to put through the offensive place names bill, the one that removed a certain
actually,
word off the
that
map.
was not my bill.
Right.
That's Donald Sartoma's bill.
But there was a lot of education within Augusta with your colleagues in the legislature that needed to happen. That's what I recollect.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, there were other bills about tribal issues that were going through the legislature, and just about every representative that I talked to had to be educated from the ground up every single time. And I thought, that's another piece that I thought it might help if they knew something about Native issues to begin with, since they're making policy reference to tribes and affecting the tribes. And a lot of times, and I've said it before, it's like anything that goes before judiciary, our laws, and I even said it to the committee. I said, it's like, you guys, you have no idea of our history, you don't know anything hardly about who we are or our issues, and having you decide policy for the tribes is like a carpenter doing brain surgery. It just is not, you can't do a good job. So this year, I guess, one of the things that happened was that we had an orientation about tribal issues for the legislature. And thankfully, Representative Talbot Ross helped get that through, and James and Darren helped me to sort of educate the legislators, and there were quite a few that attended. It was like a 3-4 hour session, and there was a good 50 or 60 in the room, I think. So yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of doing. It takes a lot of planning and talking, and of course we didn't have the tools that other legislators had. We did not have a vote. We still don't have a vote, but we have a voice. And sometimes they will hear us, and other times they won't. So we just have to keep doing what we do.
Anything else, Mike? All right. We're gonna transition to the panel. After the panel, we'll take a short break. But I want to make sure, some of this is really documenting the law, the history of the law, and how it's been implemented up to this point. Oftentimes, so if you're on the panel, so James, John Bear, John, and Mullion, if you could come up to the front and talk. These people, in different ways and at different times, have had really important roles in the implementation of the LD 291 law, and they can speak to and kind of fill out some of the story that that Donna started with in terms of, you know, where have we been? So I think we'll probably start with John Bear, and I'm gonna figure out how to maybe turn these up a little bit. I just wanna make sure, because we're recording this, it's well documented and all of that, so. I do think that a good transition, and this might be a good order of people, starting down there with John Bear, because he was very involved in the implementation of the law through learning results. James Francis, who's the director of the Culture and Historic Preservation Department for the Penobscot Nation, he was involved in developing curriculum for to support the law. And as ambassador and as an activist, Mullion has been traveling to a lot of schools across the state in terms of trying to communicate various issues related to our own history and culture. And John Mattis, who's now a retired faculty member here at the University of Maine, can speak to, and I'm going to end with you because I think your role here at the university and sort of how you struggle to implement and teach about this law will set up what Rebecca and I will talk about in the final sort of hour or so. Does that make sense to people following us? Okay. So I'll hand it over to John Bear, and you can talk about, you know, what you talk about.
Okay, so can you hear me okay? I'll try to use a bigger voice. I guess what I'll talk about that then. I can't believe it was like Elizabeth Donna introduced it 18 years ago when we started the commission, and when Rebecca and I were appointed by our tribal chief and council to represent the Penobscot Nation. Basically, they said, "You're our voice. You make the decisions." You know, and that was it was interesting to kind of have that position, because I think even in that commission we felt when we did say things that they were not being taken even seriously, and it was a commission that was put together with like-minded people. So you know, it was kind of a rough, for me anyway, to start in getting the mindset changed. But let me just give you a little bit. Let's step back a little bit. The learning results bill was passed at that time, but the learning results were not going to be implemented for a few years. They were not going to be implemented until 2007, in which they were going to be revised every 7 years after that. And because it was really expensive. And so Donna's bill was a standalone bill that didn't have, and this is how they looked at it, and these aren't my words, but it didn't have, schools didn't have any accountability to the law because it was not a funded mandate and it wasn't in required curriculum. It wasn't embedded in that. The committee was intent then on making sure that the standalone law itself was really given a lot of meat on the bones, and came up with a lot of different ideas, a lot of different things that we would recommend and recommended that schools teach about, and a few things that we recommended that you don't even talk about. Don't go there. And so once that report was completed, the committee was then extended. Sue Gendron was the commissioner of education at that time, and she extended the commission financially. That means there's money attached to it for a few more years. I can't remember exactly what year it was, because it was 18 years ago when this all started. So then in 2007 or 2006, we were still somewhat meeting, and everybody was kind of living their own life and doing their own thing professionally. And I remember just somehow getting kind of worked into the place where I was going to go down to Augusta at the first learning results meeting, curriculum meeting, and try to, even though this was a standalone law, I was going to take, and I just talk about it like this, I was going to take and Maine Indians, which is how the law states, put it on confetti and just throw it on everybody's table and see where it sticks and see where it lands and see how it comes out. at that time, some of you older people might remember that we didn't have the learning results. Instead, we had the Common Core of Learning, which was a purple book that was very vague, really, in a lot of different ways. And as I was going through it, because now the learning results was going to come into play, I was thinking, well, I'll go in there and I'll take out all the different components of, like, reference to Maine tribes, and I will see if they're still appropriate. Well, I went through that book page by page, standard by standard, subsection by subsection. The one place I found how you teach about Maine Indians was in art. And it said, teach a Wabanaki dance. Done. That was it. And I thought, holy shit, holy cow. I have a long ways to go here. And how can I carry this baton? I was completely, going to these meetings and reporting back, asking for ideas, pushing the agenda, thought I was going to be, not getting as much as we should in there. But we ended up getting a lot. And when the learning results did come out, it came out digitally in 2007. And it was groundbreaking because it's all online, right? And but the way it was worked out was the state hired an out-of-state lady who wrote a book on how to teach social studies, or what to teach. And we took that book, and this is what the state guided us to do, is to take that book, it was taken all apart into its components, and we were going to make them, every component fit to me. So there was really even though the Learning Results Committee was made up by all teachers and administrators, superintendents, administration, and teachers, staff, it was still difficult to try to get them to buy into it as well. So Donna talks about the law, getting the buy-in and getting that passed. Well, then we had to get the buy-in to get it measurable. But it's not measurable. Okay, so we had to get it so that it's accountable, I should say. Let's not use that word measurable. We had to get it so that teachers were accountable to it, but there's no way to measure it. So how do we know it's being taught? Well, it's not being taught very well. And in fact, the City of Portland a couple of years ago adopted it as, and James can talk a little bit about this because he's worked with this. I'm not telling you what to talk about, but I know you're good at that. The way schools go out and do this is they have a speaker come in, or they might watch some YouTube videos or something like that, which is important if they get native speakers to come in, because then they're not coming in as a past, they're coming in as a present. And that's really what's important about it, is that they see us alive and part of history continuing on, even though we're not supposed to be existing today. There was policies in presidential administrations that were to exterminate us, and we were not supposed to be here. And so it's really important for students at all grade levels to know that we are still here, that the U.S. government was not 100% successful. So how do you bring that message into schools, right? How do you kind of play that through? So anyway, we got it in the first learning results in 2007 in the social studies section, and we probably got about 28 standards, I think, in there. I thought that was really, really good. We still have the standalone law. And to this day, we still have the standalone law, LD 291 from 2001. But now it's standalone, but it's incorporated into learning results, which are accountable. Still not measurable, because we don't test, and this, you have to take my opinion, standardized testing. We don't do that in social studies in Maine schools, so there's no really way to kind of look at that. Well, 2 or 3 summers ago, I can't even remember now, we redid the learning results, so they're off a little bit on there after 7 years. And it's a second revamp of the learning results. And the Cultural Affairs Committee, Education Cultural Affairs Committee, actually took it upon themselves, which was really good, to say that this Donna's law, the standalone law still, which still exists today, is still not represented, thank you for saying this, completely in our learning results. And they felt like it was an add-on to everything. Well, it was. I mean, we have to take steps. They're not going to give us the entire cake. You know, they might let us stick our finger in the whipped cream, but that's all they're going to, you know, feel like, well, we did something for them. So we have to take these steps to kind of make this happen. And we're still, even though I sat in a whole summer on the revamping of them under the directive of the Education Cultural Affairs Committee, they wanted it not to be looked like as an add-on. They wanted it to be looked at as a very inclusive, important part of the curriculum. So it had to basically have some meat on it in the learning results. So I was there, the person that, I guess, I don't know what they called me, expert something, but whatever it was, I went there and I sat there and answered questions over the course of 2-day sort of workshops, 1-day workshops, you know, online stuff. And we got it in more sections now. But not only that, it's got a little more meat to it. It's still not good because it's still, schools are still not accountable to it because there's no way to measure it. So when Donna said the state moves really slow in what they're doing, they are moving really slow in what they're doing because that's, I guess, the way they do it, at least with certain topics. So the state has taken upon themselves where they reinvigorated, was it last year, Madonna? Or this year? I can't remember what it was. I don't know. The commission, no, we're a committee, right? Committee, not a commission. Reestablished the committee into a committee, I guess. And we've done 2 statewide trainings so far with teachers, and I've been doing the part on behalf of the committee, the trainings. And we went to Portland, and we had a bunch of teachers that signed up for that. Portland's doing a really good job on this. But we had a lot of teachers, and surprisingly enough, if you have a history of what's been happening politically within the state of Maine, and what we've been fighting for years in the mascot issues, we had about 8 teachers from Skowhegan show up in Portland for these trainings, which was, how do you teach Wabanaki studies in your classroom? And I really want to give teachers something to take back to their classroom. One of the things I want them to take back is the importance of teaching it, but also ideas for what they should teach and how they should break it down. The person out of the Department of Education that's been appointed to the special project, she's in charge of 4 special projects, is Mary Herman. And she's been attending these trainings as well, and it's a great support on behalf of the state, showing that they're serious about this. We followed up with a training in Brewer about 3 weeks ago, and this is completely voluntary for teachers to come to. And we had 115 teachers from the area show up. And I just got word they were expanding. They got a big request in Lewiston area. So being involved in this process since the beginning, I've seen a lot of good things happening. Resource evaluation is critical. Teachers need to understand how to do that, not only within written and film resources, but humans as resources as well, because there's a lot of people that were earlier on trying to make money on this. And we're making good money on this bill by misrepresenting their affiliation with a federal or state recognized tribe. And in the meantime, Donald Sartoma's squaw bill, offensive names bill, but it really eliminated a lot of the word squaw from a lot of public areas, had passed around the same time as Donna's did. But then later on, Madonna Sartoma had a bill that passed that was an impersonation bill, which I don't know off the top of my head, I don't have the numbers in my head, but if you misrepresent yourself as you're getting paid as a tribal speaker, as a human, to represent indigenous people, federal or state recognized tribe, well, her bill is specific to federally recognized tribe of Maine, then there's a financial penalty that can be imposed on schools, artists, venues, individuals who are trying to make money on that, who are misrepresenting themselves, in other words, not tribally enrolled. And so there's been these kind of steps and these processes that have been happening, and teachers are really interested in how to do this, how to take these into the classroom, because we can talk to their students all we want, and the students can realize we're still alive, but the teachers have to follow through with that, and if they don't, we're not making much stride, other than just to be a Polaroid snapshot. So the work is continuing, and I'll let James go. I don't know, Darren, did you have officially like what you wanted to?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, that's
Hello, good morning. My name is James Francis, and although I wasn't the appointee to the commission, I was a student here, I believe working on my master's degree at the time, and I wanted to do a paper on this new law, which we all affectionately call LD 291. It's Maine State Law 2001, Chapter 403, which is the actual title of it. I wanted to write a paper, so I began going to the meetings and, as Donna mentioned earlier, feverishly taking notes for my own work as a historian and wanting to document this process. But early on, the commission was looking for someone to take notes at the meeting, and so I was actually hired by the commission to work with the administrator for the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission to administer the meetings and set up times and contact people and do all the kind of legwork. So I had the benefit of sitting at the table with a lot of smart Wabanaki scholars, but also educators from around the state. So when the final report was issued, I think in 2004, by the Wabanaki Studies Commission, funding for my position kind of dwindled away, and I was the chair back on the reservation for the Penobscots. I was the chair of the Cultural and Historic Preservation Committee. The committee was formed along with the new Cultural and Historic Preservation Department. So, and the committee was there as kind of to help guide the new department on what that department looks like. And one thing that I was really aware of is that when the Wabanaki Studies Commission, the commission that was built around the law, was trying to get funding, we had no real funding leg. There was no kind of fiscal component to it to be able to go apply for grants and whatnot. And so, as chair of the cultural committee, we decided to create a couple of positions within the department, one of them being a tribal historian position and the other cultural education coordinator. Cultural education coordinator was to help grow cultural activities within the community, and the tribal historian position was designed to collect tribal histories, engage with the elders, but also educational outreach. And so I wrote the job description and subsequently got the job. I want to just warn people, be careful what you put in job description, especially. But a big component was educational outreach, and one of the first things that we did was to write a grant to develop some curriculum, to take the final report and all the wisdom and knowledge of the Wabanaki Studies Commission and implement it at a very tribal level. And so we worked with Indian Island School and the Old Town School and developed 12 units of learning and pilot tested them in both 4th and 5th grade classes. And at Old Town, we got a class that was the teacher followed them from 4th grade to 5th grade. There's a certain term for that. But these, John was talking about 18 years. I went to the bank a couple months ago, and one of those 4th and 5th graders was working at the bank. I could feel the gray hair burning like right on the side of my head. But there was, so we did that, and then we followed that grant up almost immediately with a second grant to the same funding organization to develop more curriculum. And we wanted to broaden a couple of things. One, the first grant focused on kind of that middle ground, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. We wanted to go below that to K-3, and we also wanted to go to secondary schools, high schools. And we also wanted to broaden what we were doing geographically. So the second grant called for us to take those 12 units and bring them on the road. And we went to every University of Maine campus and had a day-long training talking about these resources that we had developed. And then at the end of that day, we asked for people who want to join us on our next project. And we took applications, and we tried to choose teachers from every corner of the state to kind of broaden that, but also getting teachers who were at the K-3 level and also in high school, and tried to really grow from what we had started with the first grant and kind of expand, what do we do next? So we did that. Portland Schools system actually has that second batch of curriculum right now, and looking to try to implement it into their curriculum. I've worked with Fiona Hopper, who is the Wabanaki kind of curriculum coordinator down there in the Portland School system for a few years now, maybe more than that. She's really conscientious and listens really well, which is a really key component to that. And then we decided that, while working for the Wabanaki Studies Commission, teacher training was a really big component. We had these summer institutes where we would bring teachers in for a whole week, day after day, kind of different subject matters, and it worked really well. And although I felt we were kind of preaching to the choir early on, as we progressed, there were more and more teachers who, weren't necessarily kind of fit into that mold. So with that in mind, at Penobscot, we decided we got a Maine Community Foundation, I believe, grant to do a Teach the Teachers, which were a series of workshops that we held in October. We really wanted to grab teachers before that big itch of November came and said, we got to teach something about Native Americans. It's Native American Heritage Month. So we really wanted to get to them before that. And so we started, and we did this for about 5 years. Every October, we would have teacher trainings on the reservation. We held them mostly in the tribal court area. But bringing teachers to the reservation, see the museum, see the community, but also kind of get some tools to how to implement things into their classroom. So we did that for a few years, and then even for us, things have fallen off within the realm of the history. Made all that stuff available and just kind of let people have access to that. But it's really been gearing up, and we mentioned the Portland schools. We've been doing a lot of what we call cultural tourism. We offer river trips down the Penobscot, and people camp over on Sugar Island. I think we did 8 trips this summer. And one of those trips was an overnight trip by Portland school teachers. Darren joined us up on Sugar Island. I don't think he's ever been in a canoe. But and we brought him over there.
I've never been wet.
I think Belen was there too, right? Yeah. So we, and they spent overnight, and we had a lot of great programs, huddled in a mosquito-proof tent. But it was, a really good program, and we got a lot of positive feedback from the teachers to be in that kind of immersive, outdoor type of atmosphere. So, we're still kind of bumping along. And I think that there's a lot of excitement today, and we'll talk about this in the future of this bill going on up into these meetings where the committee is formed back up. And, I'm really excited for teachers to really start embracing this law. And I think part of that embracing needs to be kind of a nudge to teachers and a place to go to. I think there's not a lot of confidence for teachers in, where are the resources, who do I speak to? That's why early on, Penobscot, we were like, hey, we're here, this is who you contact. But I think that, doing that across Wabanaki country is going to be pretty important for teachers to have that one place they can go to and feel confident that the information there is, tribally sanctioned and appropriate. Thanks. Oh, you have one.
Well, those two are hard to follow. So in 2001, I was kind of an angry little punk teenager in high school. And I was just kind of waking up to a lot of this stuff. I started getting upset about sports mascots that depicted Indians in a stereotypical way, watching the Skowhegan Indians play the Nokomis Warriors. I had this big aha moment, seeing my peers in the fake headdresses, fake feathers and war paint and all that. And it kind of fueled this 20 years now of my focus on that area for sure. I also was able to go to the State House and testify, I think Donna may have brought me there, maybe, on the offensive names bill, and my Aunt Rebecca was also there, and maybe my grandmother. There was a lot of people, a lot of women from across the state, Indigenous women from a lot of different tribes, a lot of people in general, but I was struck by all the women coming forward with very specific stories full of trauma about this word. And I remember thinking, that bill was successful, but I remember thinking, these women just stood there and bravely told these stories, and it was human fear and trauma and emotion and joy at the recovery from these things. And I really thought that's what swayed a lot of the lawmakers, because a lot of them were like, well, it's just a weird word, get over it. But when they really saw the pain that this word brought and that it was used in a hate crime sense so often, it made a big difference. I also, I went to John Baptist High School, and I was in a high-level political science class as a senior, and we had like a debate exercise where we could pick any topic and we had to present for 5 minutes, those little elevator speeches that we're all used to now. We had to, go on and on for 5 minutes and really convince the class of what our topic was. And our topics were approved and announced like a week beforehand, so we all knew what we would be talking about. So a classmate of mine goes up there and proudly states, my topic is Indians shouldn't go to college for free. And this had already been vetted by the teacher. So this had gotten through, and this was, it was about when the law passed, so it's not too long ago, it's not ancient history. And I remember sitting in my seat, and I had a completely different topic picked out. So I had to go up there and say, well, now my topic is, this is why the tuition waiver program exists. And I didn't run that by the teacher, but I figured it was on them at this point that they had let that kind of topic come up through. And I really liked this teacher, and I respected him, and I thought, how could this happen to me? So then I had to go back, do a completely different research. I found out about why the tuition waiver is in place, and in the broader scope, why programming exists for tribes at a federal level. We have paid for these things in blood and theft of land and resources, which is useful for me in my work now. So I learned at a pretty young age just how important education is. And I remember that student giving his speech, and he talked about how he was from Glenburn, he was a white male, he grew up poor, he doesn't believe minorities should have an edge over him simply because they're minorities. And I went up and talked to, I kind of kept my cool, but it was hard. know, as a teenager, you're already pretty unsure of yourself. And to have him validated by the institution and the teacher, and knowing that his topic was considered just as valid as mine was tough. So I went to Sugar Island and braved the canoes and the mosquitoes with Darren and James for the Portland Teachers Conference. And a man approached me, one of the teachers, and he looked kind of familiar about my age. And he shook my hand and he said, "Do you remember who I am?" And it wasn't the exact kid. That would be too perfect. I thought about lying to make it that way, but none of you would know. But I'll be truthful. And I meet a ton of people, so he looked familiar, and I said, "Well, yeah, but I'm spacing on your name." And he said, "We went to high school together," and then it all kind of clicked. And he said, "I have to apologize." He goes, "Because we were awful to you." He said, "You were up there speaking your truth all the time," and I was. I was always running my mouth about everything. And he goes, and I, you know, the more I go further in life, he goes, "I follow your career, and I'm proud to know you." And I realized that you were just speaking from your human experience, and you were speaking about things that harmed you, and why we shouldn't follow these stereotypes, and why we should learn about people as a whole. So we shook hands and made nice or whatever, and I still couldn't, I don't think he actually told me his name, so I had to email Fiona Hopper, the coordinator. And I said, I described him physically, and I said, "We went to high school together, I don't remember his name." So she sent me his name back, and I said, "God, he wasn't even like a bad one. I remember being friendly with him." So he must have just felt guilty by not standing up and speaking out, because he was absolutely never cool to me. He wasn't one of the ones making those speeches. But, you know, even the association and seeing what happened to me was enough to make him apologize in person 20 years later. So I think that planting those seeds and thinking about how we're teaching children, we never know how they'll process that and feel even years later. And our collective love affair with Skowhegan over this mascot stuff has produced millions of teachable moments that are useful if we use them. We went up there in 2015 before they took the first vote to keep the mascot, and John Mayer and James and I and a bunch of others sat on a panel, Darren, explaining to it was a subcommittee of their school board. It was still a huge committee. They have like a 30-member school board, and the committee we spoke to were about as big as our panel. And we kind of, you know, each one of us spoke, and it was a wide array of ages and genders, and all the different tribes were represented. And I remember thinking, if that doesn't convince people to not have this mascot, I don't know what would. Because some of us came at it from a very emotional, just kind of, you know, this hurts me standpoint. Some people were very intellectual, and, you know, this is why psychologically you're harming children in your district by keeping this. And it was just kind of a potpourri of reasons to get rid of your mascot. And afterwards, a gentleman came up to me. He's probably, you know, 6'4", bald, you know, kind of intimidating looking. He put his finger on my face, and he said, "I am just as Indian as you are, and Skowhegan is my tribe." And I was like, wow, you know, this is layers to this. Like, this is human psychology and what we identify with. And he really doesn't see us as a distinct group from him. He thinks that he is a tribal nation because Skowhegan has this Indian mascot. And I think, you know, a lot of us have been involved in a lot of different mascot battles. And some of them are much easier than others. You kind of bring it forward. They say, "Oh, okay, it's probably time to change." They involve the students. They make a change. Skowhegan was a very special case. They had this very deep entitlement because of the history of the tribal people there, the name of the town. And I remember them like doing this kind of half-assed research. Well, you know, Penobscots didn't even live here. It was Abenakis, and Abenakis don't like Penobscots. So let's call the Abenakis in Vermont and see if we can get them on our side. And it was like, good luck, guys. Like, let me know how that works out for you. So a tiny bit of really good information, probably at a young age for a lot of these people, that may not fix a lot of that, but it just might And my dad, former Chief Barry Dana, does a lot of cultural education. And there's this core group of people in Skowhegan that have been really instrumental in the forward motion there and the progress. They're absolutely wonderful and very steadfast in doing the right thing. And a lot of them have connections to his educational program, and he either taught them or their children or people in their family. And they go out on these excursions a lot like Sugar Island, and you're in nature and you're learning survival skills, and you're and it's not just the culture, it's being around Indigenous people as modern society members with you, and you're joking and you're talking about your mortgage and your car and your kids and your pets and very normal human things. And it's hard to hate up close. When you look people in the eye, when you feel the same feelings as them, and when you tap into that empathy, I think that makes it a whole lot harder to hate them. Skowhegan Indian Pride, when we first started this last go-around, they formed as a group to try to keep the mascot, and they were led by a school board member, but obviously she wouldn't put her name out there. She was an elected official. So they kind of propped up this student in the district, and he was a homeschool student. He was like 17 years old, and you guys remember, poor little guy. He'd be standing outside the meetings with a sign, this is my culture, I'm an Indian, and he never said much, but he was always there, and he was active online and supposedly running this group. So after the forum, when I got escorted from the microphone by a police officer and everything kind of went bad, I didn't even say anything. They were just, afraid that I was going to say something. We were all there, I think all with the same old crowd, we were all there, and he came up to me after and he said, I've been thinking a lot about this, and as a Christian, I've been taught to love other humans. He goes, and in my religion, I would be going against my beliefs if I were to keep up this mascot fight. He goes, when I see you all talking about this, I see pain in your eyes, and I can, in good conscience, keep this up. He goes, so I apologize, I won't be in this group anymore. And it was really a big turning point in the whole thing. So to think about that, a child who had been very heavily indoctrinated by adults that he trusted and probably feared a little bit, was able to break free from that, see things for himself, and form his own opinion, and then act on it. It's kind of momentous when you think about it. So it got into the press, and it was a big deal. And of course, the adults talked horribly about him and said awful things. And so there's a lot of ugliness that happened over there throughout the whole fight. But I think about moments like that, where you are able to break through to people, where you are able to change those hearts and minds. And LD 291, I think, throughout all these years has been about just that. We've seen it supported and mobilized around. We've seen it kind of, the ball dropped, but it's always there. And we have it in writing that this needs to have attention, and we need to be working on it all the time. So I'm encouraged by the efforts around it currently. I think it's great that we have some of the past players, not the has-been, the founder, is still an active role in the committee, and my aunt, Dr. Rebecca Sockbeeson, that we have her as a resource who's doing this important work nationally. And it makes me happy that we have so many talented Indigenous people at the table informing these teachers who really want to do some good work on it. And I think, my kids are 10 and 12. Well, my oldest will be 13 on Monday, so don't tell her I called her 12. That's a very, very big deal. So thinking about how their high school experience will be so very different from mine, and mine was probably so very different from my parents. It's progress, and it's sad that it takes such a long time, and I think you can get overwhelmed thinking about the plight of Indigenous people, and it's like Madonna Soktoma, we're in Skowhegan. She goes, why the hell would you want to be us? She goes, don't you know what we've been through? And it was just so guttural, and you could see a lot of them, even the ones that we found out were kind of mean and not on our side, you could see them affected by that. This Indigenous experience is not something you want to try on and wear like a costume. It's hard sometimes. So yes, the education is very much key, and it can be overwhelming and very sad, but I think the fact that we are still here, and I heard this great quote recently, resilience, you're not born with resilience. You know, it's something you kind of earn like armor over time, and I'm just proud to be a part of this effort and proud to serve with so much of my family and loved ones, and you guys too. Thank you. You're my family too. James is my cousin. I'm kind of related to
My name is John Mattis. I am faculty emeritus in the College of Education and Human Development here at the University of Maine. And I am very honored to be a part of this panel and as a white person to be able to share a little bit of my perspective on LB 291 and the struggle that we're all engaged in to make that a reality in all of our schools. I want to thank Donna for her leadership in getting this bill passed. It's been an inspiration to me. All the work that she's done, she's shared a little bit of that with us because I think that it's something that the history and culture of the indigenous people of the state is something that should have been in the curriculum all along. It was the right thing to do. It should never have been excluded in the first place, as it was, and unfortunately, to too great an extent, still is. And I feel that we have a lot of work still to do. I'm really encouraged by some of the things that have happened just in the last few months. But I'm also looking at the fact that this is 18 years since this bill was passed, and the children born in the year that it was passed are now seniors in high school, getting ready to graduate from high school. And to the extent that we have failed to, as a state, as an educational system, to fully implement this law, we've failed to reach a generation of school students who should have had this opportunity to learn about the indigenous people of the state, and who I think in too many cases did not learn that. I've taught in teacher education for 30 years at this institution, and most recently, last spring, taught our education in a multicultural society course. And whenever I work with students, I would ask them if they could name the tribes of the state. And in far too many cases, it's taken far too long to get even that basic information identified by students who have grown up in the state. To just look at a classroom of students, the majority of whom are from Maine, and not have it come immediately is really frustrating. And that's so basic, and there's so much more that they need to know besides what are the names of the tribes. So I feel that there's still a huge amount of work to be done. As a faculty emeritus, I will do whatever I can to support that work. My wife and I have recently moved to New Mexico to be closer to our son and his family in Los Angeles. And that was a very hard decision for me to make because there was so much that was pulling me to stay here so that I could continue to be involved in the ways that I had been. But I came back yesterday, 3 airline flights, but I'm here, and as I have told many people, I'm only an email away, and there's Skype and Zoom, and I intend to continue to do whatever I can. So I'm really happy to be here, back in the traditional territory of the Penobscot Indian Nation, and to be a part of this. I really want to focus on what I see as some of the barriers and struggles working with pre-service and practicing teachers, and with the College of Education and the administration of this university, because I feel that there's so much more that needs to be done. I would like to make a pitch for all of you to contact the president of this university and say that we need to have Wabanaki history and culture included in the curriculum for teacher education, and we need to have a faculty member in the College of Education and Human Development who has that expertise and is able to accurately instruct teacher education students, because it seems to me that without that change in the way that teachers are educated, we're still dependent on trying to catch people after they're in the educational system, here, there, however we can. As has already been described, there are a lot of efforts going on, but this should be part of their teacher preparation. And it won't be part of the teacher preparation unless the College of Education has a person who's devoted to that, who can do that work on an ongoing basis. Unfortunately, there are many ways that people can end up in a classroom in Maine. We have multiple teacher preparation programs, we have alternative routes to certification, and so no one teacher education program is necessarily going to be able to impact every teacher. But if the University of Maine did that, I think it would be a big step forward. If the state of Maine would make the commitment that teachers needed to have this as part of their certification requirements, that would be a huge step forward. If the state of Maine would decide that Indigenous people who are not the products of a teacher education program, but who know their history and culture, could be Wabanaki Studies teachers in schools, that would be a big step forward. I don't think that it's necessary to have gone through a teacher education program to do the work of teaching Wabanaki Studies. I think there are plenty of people who could do that very well. At this point, from time to time, we have people in as guest speakers, but it's still the teacher in the classroom has to do that work. Having a guest speaker come in is not sufficient. It's good to know that Wabanaki people are still here, and having a guest speaker who's a Wabanaki person at least conveys that information. And there are many other things that students can learn from guest speakers, but still the teacher has to do the work, has to understand enough to be supportive, has to have the relationships to reach out to guest speakers, has to be able to do the follow-up, should be integrating Wabanaki studies into the curriculum wherever it's appropriate, so it should not be a one-day or a two-day affair. There's just so much that is dependent on having teachers well-trained to do this work. Rebecca has taught a course in Alberta that all teachers going through that certification program there get that course, so they get an introduction. As far as we know, and we've talked about this, there's no university in the United States that has that as a required part of teacher preparation. And my dream is that the University of Maine would be the first to do that. But I sure hope it doesn't take another 18 years. So I'm feeling some frustration about this. I have talked with everybody from the president on down about we need to do this. What I get is thank you very much for your input, and then nothing happens. So I feel like if everyone would contact the president, contact the provost, contact the dean, and say this is something that needs to be done, it needs to be coming from more than just one person. We really need to make this a priority. And it really needs to be an institutional change. As a white person, I am extremely conscious of my limitations as an educator and how challenging it is as a teacher educator to try to incorporate Wabanaki studies into the courses that I've taught. I'm always reminded of a lesson that I learned years ago when I was working with Ted Mitchell on the formation of the Native American Studies program, about how different my experience is from the experiences of Wabanaki people. And I can tell stories, but I'm not sure I'm probably exceeding my time as it is, and don't want to take too much longer. But I think for teachers who are white, who are having to learn from too close to zero knowledge when they come into teacher education or when they come into the classroom. This is a long road. It's not necessarily an easy road. I think for people who have been privileged, and as white people, we are privileged in multiple ways, and we may have other identities through which we're also privileged, to understand what it means to be discriminated against, to be stereotyped, and all the issues with mascot that you mentioned, how that feels very different to a Wabanaki person than to somebody in Skowhegan who thinks that they are an Indian and has no clue what that means. I think for white people who have not experienced discrimination in the same way that Wabanaki people have, and who either have not experienced discrimination through their other identities, or who maybe have identities that are not privileged but haven't really thought that much about what it means to have an identity that's not privileged, to be able to make this leap, to be able to have some understanding of what it means to be a Wabanaki person in today's society is a big step. And you're constantly having to remind yourself as a white person that your experience is different, that you have not had to endure some of the things that Wabanaki people have had to endure. I am going to share one story, and it's a story of my own failure in the classroom, and I share it because I think it's important to know for white educators who are trying to do this work, some of the challenges that are involved, and how you can so easily fail yourself up and say, okay, I hope I've learned from that mistake, and I'm going to move on and keep doing this work, rather than retreat from the work out of fear of making more mistakes. So I've been involved with Native American programs since the 1990s, and was one of the people who helped in the formation of Native American Studies here on this campus during that time, and it's been something that's been very much a part of my interest and commitment. Ever since I sat in Ted Mitchell's office and listened to stories and learned what it was I needed to do in the formation of Native American Studies. And I've tried ever since to include Wabanaki perspectives in all of the classes that I taught wherever I could see a way to incorporate that. Wish I'd done even more, but I did as much as I felt I could at the time. And I think that for a fair number of teachers, that's who are white, that's what they're trying to do. There are some people who really do make an effort. And it is an effort because too often you're doing it with no support. And that's been my experience. So the story is, 2009, I was teaching a class for future teachers, and part of the course had to do with school-family relationships, and I was trying to incorporate something regarding Wabanaki people in that particular course that I was teaching. I had had organized a symposium in honor of Rita Joe, the Mi'kmaq poet from Nova Scotia, who had visited campus several years earlier, and I had had the opportunity to hear her, and then she passed away in 2007. In 2008, I organized this symposium in honor of her. And then I was using her autobiography as a way of talking about family-school relationships and some of the things that she had to say on that subject. And one of my students, this was a class of about, 20 to 30 students, all white with the exception of one person who was indigenous. And I was teaching this lesson for these students. And I thought everything was going fine, and then one student put up his hand and said, yeah, he or she, I think it was he, but I'm not certain now, said something to the effect of, what about alcoholism on the reservation? Except it was probably a lot more stereotypical than that. I can't remember the exact words, but I didn't have an answer for that question. And I spent a fair amount of time talking about Wabanaki history and culture, but I was not prepared to answer that particular question. And I did what I should never have done, which was ask the one indigenous student if she had anything to say on that subject, which I deeply regret putting her on the spot, and she chose not to say anything. And then I didn't follow up. And I'm deeply embarrassed, I have to say, to tell that story, but I think that's a situation that white teachers are likely to find themselves in they need to know how to deal with that kind of situation better than I did at that particular moment. In retrospect, I can look at it and say, okay, since then, I've learned a lot about intergenerational trauma. A good deal of that has come out of the work of Maine Wabanaki Reach and the Maine Tribal State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has really brought those issues to the fore and helped anybody who's paying attention to understand what intergenerational trauma is all about and why some Indigenous people are struggling because of intergenerational trauma. I wish I'd known then what I know now, but it's been a learning experience. It's been a journey for me, and I think it's a journey that I wish more teachers would embark on. The one workshop is not going to do it. It takes really a lifetime of commitment to develop the understandings to overcome your own biases as a privileged white person in the society and really understand what's at stake for Indigenous people in having this done and done well. And I think we need to be realistic about just what a journey this is for white teachers and how much it takes to be, as a white person, doing one's best to make sure that Wabanaki perspectives are included in all of our schools. We've got a huge job. There are 717 public and private schools in the state. And reaching all of those schools and all of those students in all of those schools and knowing that there's a lot of teacher turnover, so you can get a teacher who's up to speed and then she or he leaves and you're starting over from scratch. It's an ongoing job. It's huge. And we have a lot of work to do. And again, I'm really thankful for all the work that's been done and encouraged by some of the things that are happening currently. But I would ask us all to recommit to this work and do everything that's possible, and especially put pressure on institutions of higher education that are training teachers to make sure that this is done as part of teacher education and in graduate schools as part of teacher professional development. This is really important. We really got to recommit to doing this work and making it happen. So thank you very much, and again, I'm honored and very happy to have had this opportunity to be a part of this symposium today. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. Thanks to the panel. Are there questions for the panel? And we'll take a short break after this. Yeah, Rebecca.
I think, can someone just clarify, maybe John or John, what is the difference between, for folks, the difference between the Maine learning results? Like, what is the Maine learning results? Okay, we know that it's been updated and that there's a standalone law, but can you just clarify for everyone what exactly is the Maine learning results? How is that, John worked quite hard to get them updated to include Maine Indigenous content. And then there's also the standalone law, right? And so because there's no measurable, like John has said, then can you help us to better understand in terms of teacher certification in Maine, what's the relationship between teacher certification in Maine and the Maine learning results?
So the Maine learning results are a set of student learning outcomes in 8 different subject areas. And LD 291 primarily appears in the social studies subject area. The emphasis in Maine schools has been on reading and language arts because in 2001, Congress passed No Child Left Behind, which mandated testing of students in those areas and basically put schools under the microscope in reading and language arts. So those are the areas that are assessed. And as John Bear was pointing out, there's no assessment for social studies and no way of really knowing what it is that students are learning in social studies. The hope is that teachers will use the Maine learning results as the framework for planning instruction in each content area. But without any assessment, that can very easily go by the boards. And also, since reading and language arts are what's being assessed, most of the instructional time goes into reading and language arts and math. And social studies, and I've heard this over and over again from social studies educators in the state, social studies is being put on the back burner because schools are under the gun to produce results on student assessments for reading and language arts and math.
Yeah, and so it's a great question because it's so convoluted, really. So how do we know, because there are teachers who are doing good work,
Yes.
how do we know that they're doing good work? They're few and far between, we know that, but we don't have any way where there's, and I'm not even saying standardized testing would even work in that respect. Don't get me wrong, I mean, several conversations with Pender, our new commissioner, and she's not a fan of standardized testing. She's very vocal about that. But because again, like how, so basically, how do we know who and what and how successful these teachers are at teaching Wabanaki studies? We don't, because they are accountable to the learning results, and they do get tested basically within those certain areas of the learning results. But what are we really seeing out of those things that are tested and are measurable? Are they accurate? We really can't say, but the bottom line is that that's what they use at the state level. So we were trying to take it a step further and seeing, well, maybe the teachers need to do a self-assessment on that. But then again, with Fiona Harper in Portland, you know, there's really no rubric in which they can use in which they can get some accurate data on how they're teaching. And I remember when the law came through, it was, you know, basically we have students that go into kindergarten and come out in graduation. We used to call it K-12, now it's called K graduation. But the example I use, Mullen used a lot of examples too. When I came out of high school, I didn't know really much about Samoset or Bashby's or our famous chiefs in the Penobscot area, let alone Passamaquoddy, Macromalacete area. But I did hear about Chief Joseph Sitting Bull Geronimo. And that's what people are comfortable talking about. So when we have these learning results, when we have these components of these, basically what they do is they tell a teacher at different grade levels, at different subjects, how to build a platform in which learning can build upon. We used to call it scaffolding or spiraling curriculum. But you have to have something in which the next teacher can take and then have that built upon, have something that the next teacher can take in third grade and build on, and fourth grade and build on. And that's what learning results give, are these basic premises of those building blocks. That's what's being measured. But there are teachers that are skipping, so some grades aren't doing it, some schools aren't doing it, and that's when it becomes a problem. So the learner results really are those microcosms of ideas and ideologies that they build on, that they actually somehow then assess a student on and understand learning or places where learning hasn't taken place. It's supposed to give feedback to the teacher, the school, the district. And there are huge gaps.
Does Portland have any kind of assessment of learning or Wabanaki studies as part of their program?
I don't think so, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think at the last training Fiona and I did with the state, well, there's several people that are involved, that question was brought up, and she said, we're looking at possibly starting out with self-assessment. That way we get some ideas for how we even begin to look at it. I mean, that's how far behind we are. I mean, we got these ideas, they're out there, they're in front of us, but yet we don't know how to drive them. How are we going to tell if they're successful? That's part of the issue of the learner results. Margaret?
I'm just wondering, is there a reason that Wabanaki studies could not be delivered in the context of reading and language arts? I mean, maybe there's a question about materials, but there must be people already trying to do that in that context. I wonder what you know about that.
So I'm just going to say that when we're in learner results revision committees, and even at the implementation of learner results, we now got to do what Donna did to get this law passed. We got to lobby into those subject areas, and that's really difficult because they say the law changes the Maine history law. It added this to the Maine history law. What does that have to do with anything that we're teaching in math or science? Well, it has a lot to do. When I taught at Indian Island School, the science teacher, the language arts teacher, myself, we worked together. We thought of themes that we could take into different subject areas, and these weren't necessarily something that was all the time, but they could meet these measurables, these standards that they have to meet in the learner results. But at the same time, getting cultural vaccinations, give them these shots. Let's put a little bit of this into them, a little bit at a time. Build up their immunity to it so you don't become so sensitive. I mean, we really have to lobby into those subject areas now.
The best education would be interdisciplinary, so the answer is yes, it certainly could be done. Part of the problem is the assessments for English language arts are developed across a multi-state consortium. They're not state assessments, so there's not going to be anything that's specific to Wabanaki in any of those English language arts assessments, because it's something that is supposed to cover, I think, half the states in the United States are using the same assessment. So we're not going to be able to tell anything from the English language arts assessment, and to the extent that teachers are teaching to that assessment, it's a disincentive for them to do the integration of anything that's Maine specific, including Wabanaki studies. So we have to have our own separate assessment system, and that's why I was asking about Portland and whether Portland was developing any kind of assessment system for Wabanaki studies, because if you don't have an assessment system, you don't know what it is that students are learning and how effective what you're doing is.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yes, how involved the tribal government? How involved are each governor and council? I think that's that would be a huge factor in this, because I think that they could. I've been on council a lot. I've never realized. I knew the bill was passed, and we just never had that much input. So that we thought evidently that you guys are taking care of it. But I think that you need to coordinate that with tribal government. And we come back to sovereignty. And we have to teach people that we are sovereign. And we do have that right to pass on our history, but it's not the way some non-tribal member sees it, it's the way we see it.
Yeah, and, you know, we try to get our foot in the door with the tribes through the tribal education directors,
Oh, yeah.
and we're still at the learning stages on that.
But we're so unique, we have our own schools,
Yeah.
we've got our own superintendent. I mean, that would be a good beginning, and then definitely tribal government. I mean, you mentioned about people contacting the president of the University of Maine. I think that we need to contact our governors and our councils and have them make that request also.
Yeah, this new,
Absolutely.
yeah, this new committee, a lot of us serve on it. It's probably pretty representative of a lot of the tribes, I think, and I'm on it, and other representatives will. So hopefully they'll be on an interface. And I think we get caught up in this, like, whose responsibility is it?
It's our responsibility. Tribal responsibility.
Right, but why is the burden of educating the whole state of Maine on the people that have been oppressed by the whole system all the time? And I know what you're saying. I totally get it. The only way we're going to have a voice is if we use our voice and make sure people learn it the right way.
And when your father first started teaching culture on Indian Island, that was probably the proudest day of my life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. Yeah, we
Do
need
you
to
remember
be.
that, Tom?
I do.
Yeah,
So
like
that was
when,
the beginning.
when Bangor passed Indigenous Peoples Day, they kind of called me like, well, now what are we going to do? What are you doing? And I'm like, I don't live in Bangor. so there's that balance. But I absolutely agree that if we want it done right, we have to be at the table and doing it.
Yeah.
We need to be also seen as equals and not, well, here, we, like, I'm going to talk about the task force right now with the state of Maine government. We have the lawmakers, we have the tribal chiefs and representatives. We kind of showed up and the lawmakers were like, well, we don't know anything, so teach us. And, you know, and it's come a long way and we're making progress and it's great. And it's great that they admit that and that they're receptive to knowledge. But I think we need to be careful about where we place these burdens all the time and that we're doing it in the right way. But I agree, Grammy, don't be mad at me.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
And just real quickly, we got to keep in mind too that the messengers are only good at certain messages, you know, and we want to make sure we're encompassing all those messages, and that's part of the issue too. Is like, who do we get? Who has the ability to be a messenger as well within the area of their expertise, right? And that becomes cumbersome. Like even to get them here to an event like this,
Who are we talking about? Who?
whoever it is,
Right.
maybe it's
Non-Indians
former reps or tribal ed directors or chiefs.
And I
Or,
think that's our responsibility to pass that information on and pass on that need. And you know what, let me say something. You talked about being privileged. Okay? I taught my family that they were privileged because they were natives, they were American Indians. So, I mean, it's just a different, different understanding or different meaning.
So Donna, John, I think Donna has something to say. And this will be the last comment. We're going to take a very, very quick break. I'm just mindful of time. Donna will...
Okay, just try to make this really quick. Okay, so something was brought up here that I didn't realize, and you're saying that this is a national sort of issue with the education? Okay, and you're talking about bringing tribal governments in? Okay, well, why not use USET, NCAI,
Yes.
those organizations, bring them to the table, make it a national, bring in Smithsonian and their educational system, you know, give it to them.
All right. Just so real quick, we're going to reset a little bit, real quick bio break, like 3-4 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with, featuring Rebecca's work. So it'll be really exciting. So, okay, very quick break. Before I introduce Rebecca, who will present on some work that part of which will be part of, as her Libra faculty visiting professorship, part of a report that will really help guide our institution to really fully embrace the teaching of and training for teachers to be able to teach adequately about Maine Indigenous people. I want to say that through the work of a lot of people, many of whom were on the panel, and some of them are no longer with us, the University of Maine is becoming a regional and I think national and international leader when it comes to the recognition of its role with Indigenous people and Indigenous education. I know it's not perfect, but we've had significant achievements in the last couple of years, including a memorandum of understanding with the Penobscot Nation, which gives more control to the Penobscot Nation over the cultural heritage items here held by the university, as well as this signage project for campus, which is really shaping our understanding of place here on Marsh Island in ways that are really important as identifying it as Penobscot territory. And honestly, I think this part of it is, which is to take the question of what does it mean to deliver education on someone else's territory if you're non-native. It's a very serious question that we're basically on the very edge of answering, and Dr. Sakavason's work is the next step, I believe, for this campus and how we would more structurally think about those issues. So I just want to recognize that we've done some good work, but the challenges will involve this. This next step is really critical to creating, not only University of Maine area of excellence, but also really delivering education in a meaningful and ethical way in a tribal territory. So with that, Rebecca, many of you know her. She's been a great friend for many years, and she's one of those, many of us are blessed to be surrounded by extremely intelligent and passionate Wabanaki women in our lives, and mostly what I consider my job to do is deliver their vision. I say that all the time, by the way. They tell me. But I think that it's just this combination of being so smart and so passionate that I have yet to master on any level. I just tell my little jokes and maybe that helps me. But really such a gifted and wise and visionary scholar and educator, and we're really lucky to have her here just for this week again, and then hopefully more permanently in the future. So, Rebecca, thanks.
Well, I can assure you I'm permanently here. And for those Maine Indian people in the audience, we're still here. So, but I get what you're saying, Darren. Thanks for that generous introduction, and thank you to the panelists for framing out and prepping what it is that I want to say about this stuff. So, I want to do a couple of things in the time that we have left, and one is to sort of locate myself as a Bonawupskig scholar, and then I'm going to, which is in many ways just explaining to you what compels my research, and so why it is that I do what I do, and what's influenced my scholarly work, and that is, I'll spend a little bit of time doing that, and then this week, I think that this marks my 9th lecture in 4 days. So so I just want you to maybe think of that as I'm standing in front of you. Because in many ways, I see this as being a really important culmination of the week. Because next week, this Wabanaki Studies task force which I understand it to be very much like the commission that was initially struck. And it is like the state's renewal to the commitment to this law. That meeting, I think their second meeting is next week. Is it the second or third meeting? Okay, it's newly rebirthed in over 18 years, or about 18 years. Okay, so I've done a lot of thinking about it in the past 18 years, and I want to share with you what some of my thinking, has been and experiences around that. But first, let me get to the matters of locating myself and explaining to you what compels me to do the research. So I'm thinking, Darren, there's got to be a clicker here, or
I think maybe you just press the arrows to pull out the little drawer. Sorry.
oh, there's a keyboard here. Okay, right on. Okay, first, this is the new land acknowledgement statement that has been constructed by the Native American programs facilitated by Dr. Darren Renko. These land acknowledgements have been around, in universities for the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years, you'd say, Darren?
Yeah.
Yeah, so University of Maine is a little bit late catching on board with this, but the president of the university recently made this statement, and it will be read at university-wide events. I'm thinking that likely on my campus out in Alberta, we have done this for the past 8 years. They have been, the university senior administration has been compelled to do this by local Indigenous communities or Indigenous Native Studies programs on campus. So typically, for Darren to have led this and circulated it, facilitated the writing of it, is a pathway. I'm not going to say that I've heard our land acknowledgement out in Alberta so many times that I think, okay, well, what else can exist beyond land acknowledgements? And this is what a colleague of mine out west, Chelsea Bowell, a Métis colleague, says, what else can exist beyond land acknowledgements? So, and I think that we're there, to be asking that question. And so what I like about this particular land acknowledgement, University of Maine, so the president read it. My mother was recently at a university-wide event, maybe a month ago. And she said, I really liked, all of a sudden I got my interest. It's the first time I've ever heard a university president acknowledge the territory that the university's on and our territory that's still occupied, right? And so, and I said, yeah, that's how I felt when I first heard ours out in Alberta. Out in Alberta where I teach, there's over 60,000 Indians just in the very city that I'm in, right? And then in Maine, we have just over 5,000 Indians. Maine is like one of the whitest states in the nation, right? And that's actually a real shallow analysis. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I think about that. But University of Maine recognizes that it's located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Bunawapskeg Nation. So Bunawapskeg is whitewater. That in our language, that's how one would say whitewater or whitewater over rocks. And that's how we locate ourselves as a people along the Bunawapskeg River. So Penobscot is an anglicized way to say Bunawapskeg, right? And this is where our people lived and dwelled at this territory that we're sitting on right now. And we're forcefully removed because we were running, our Chief Joseph Orono was making attempts to sign a peace treaty, a treaty, so that Maine Indian people in Penobscot specifically wouldn't be decimated anymore. So it was an imposition, when we were moved to Indian Island, which were our sacred ancestral burial sites. So that's embedded in that sentence, where issues of water, territorial rights, encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to other Wabanaki tribal nations, of course. Wabanaki Confederacy is a very important political confederacy. And it's sort of like, I was sitting back there thinking, gosh, it's really something that it's been 18 years. Like we're so patient. We're so patient that this law was implemented and passed 18 years ago. And no one's giving up. Like people are still at it. They're ready to just fight for the people and take a stand. So it's like, when I say permanency, it's like we're still here, literally. Okay, so Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. So I just wanted to start us off with that because the university has adopted this, and I hope that you hear it a lot more. And I hope that you too ask the question, what else can exist beyond this? What else can the present university be doing beyond the statement, right? Because I know in our communities, it's like, that metaphor of walking the talk is really powerful. Otherwise it's empty, okay? It's just words. So, let's see if this works. No, I'll use this. So what has compelled my research is really this document. I did some extensive document analysis on this proclamation, which is the Phipps bounty on Wabanaki and specifically Penobscot Indians. These were all along the eastern seaboard in the United States. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this document. After the law was struck, I was invited to a social studies conference of over 200, this was in 2001 maybe, of over 200 social studies teachers in the state of Maine. I had asked them, I put this up like I am right now, and I had asked them how many of them were familiar with, and I've been asking the students all week, the classes that I've been lecturing in. I've been asking the pre-service teachers in the Faculty of Education, how many of them were familiar with Anne Frank's diary. And all but maybe one. I think one class had maybe one student that wasn't familiar with Anne Frank's diary. Then I said, okay, keep your hands up. How many are aware of the Nazi Holocaust? All of them. So I don't know how many students I reached this week, but I know that there were 8 classes. And of all those 8 classes, there was only one student that hadn't heard of the Nazi Holocaust. And she's an international student from, I think, China or Japan. Okay, so they should know about the Nazi Holocaust, and it's important, and it needs to maintain that way, right? And so, I said this is important. It's really important that they at least know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about genocide, right? It's again, another important pathway to this discussion, right? And so, and for that matter, we found out through the panel that the law wasn't funded. We knew it wasn't going to be funded. Auntie knew that it wasn't going to be funded when she put it forward. But it was such an important pathway, and maybe it's been dormant for 18 years, but we're ready to get back up again, and we're going to go at it, right? So even that, just the law is a pathway to this discussion, is a pathway to the Faculty of Education inviting me for the past year to come and lecture to these students, right? And it's given me some time to confer a PhD, to do a dissertation, I've published, I think, 5 academic articles in the analysis of this bounty, right? So it's like, now's the time, and these things don't just happen, out of the sky, right? And when you also think about the discipline of American Indian studies, or Native American studies, or American Indian education, in the discipline of education in universities, we've only been, we represent less than 1% of the professoriate. American Indian scholars represent less than 1% of the professoriate, right? And so our placement on university campuses is very marginal, right? And then in position to the field of education, these literatures in this type of research hasn't been done. I mean, it's like 30 years new. Disciplinarily, this discipline has been ongoing in education for over 100 years. So scholars have been publishing about education for over 100 years. And as American Indians, we've gotten on this power landscape within the past 30 years. Okay? So that's part of the issue, but it certainly isn't the foundation of the issue. Okay? And so now we're here. And so what I want to tell you about what I tell these students this week is when I asked them if they'd ever seen this document, none of them had seen it. There were two Maine Indian students that had seen it. And I'm happy to report that I think I ran into at least a half a dozen, including my nephew Niall, raise your hand, who are studying to be teachers, Indigenous teachers, which is, to me, it just feels so deeply hopeful for our future as Indigenous peoples, okay? So I went on to explain the document, 50 pounds, this is a 1755 document. It's never been eradicated, never been apologized for, right? And in 2011, my dissertation marked the first academic publication for a Wabanaki person to do academic analysis of this. So 1755 to 2011. There may have been other non-Native scholars to do this, but as Native people, we've always been researched, right? And so Linda Tahatway Smith asks, she's an Indigenous scholar, she asks, so what happens to the research when those who have been historically researched are actually doing the research, right? And what happens to content delivery when those who have been historically taught about are delivering the content? Not only delivering the content, but developing the content and the policies and the laws, right? Okay, so I gave this, it's always helpful to talk to students about this stuff in analogy and contemporary context. So I explained, 50 pounds for a live male Penobscot and then 40 pounds for their scalp. I asked the students if they had ever seen the movie Reverend, which made millions. I think it broke some box office hit or box office record in 2016. It's a pretty popular movie for those of you who haven't seen it. It's Leonardo DiCaprio, who is he's hailed as being a Native advocate and activist, right? And it was set in Alberta, which is where I live now, where my children, their homeland, my husband's homeland, are the Stoney Sioux people. And all throughout the movie, I asked the students, for those of them, the several students had seen the movie, I said, who was doing the scalping? In the movie, who was doing the scalping? And some students, there was always one student in one group that say, yeah, it was like, the Indians were doing the scalping, of course, right? Like, Indians are the ones that just do the scalping. They didn't say that, but it was like, that was the tone or whatever, yeah, it was the Indians doing the scalping. And so then I show them this document. Now, mind you, that's 2016, 1755 document that's been heavily subjugated, right? Heavily subjugated, it's been hidden, right? And no one really knows much about this, right? And it marks why in Maine that we only have 4 tribes in Maine. There were originally over 20 Wabanaki tribes. Russell Thornton, who wrote The Native American Holocaust, identifies that about 96 to 97% of original populations of indigenous peoples in North America have been decimated. And this is the empirical evidence of the beginning of that. Okay, is this colonial document. And it's the first era of policy against Maine Indian people. Okay, so, and I think it's an important way to start off with pre-service teachers in Maine. Because, the plight that Mullion's taken up and others, working with her to get a Maine Indigenous Peoples Day to eradicate the school mascots, because literally the red skin is the scalp, right? Is that red. And in that movie, you think in 2016, in that movie alone, millions of people saw that within the first 3 months of it being put out into the box office. It just that racist stereotype about our people just gets perpetuated. And this history gets further hidden and subjugated, right? And so that, and subsequent to that, and what my research has also, led me to better understand is that genocidal bounties like this, not only did they exist for us, they were happening before 1755, they were happening in the beginning of the 1700s. And in 1632, the British prohibited Penobscot Indians from using guns, or from trading or being able to purchase guns. So this is a people surviving this without, even more vulnerable, And the prohibition on guns was enacted because they could see, the colonial, documents say that the Penobscots were really good at using guns. So they had to prohibit the use. 1632, 100 years later, here comes this bounty. Some of the most densely populated massacres happened here in Maine and in New England. So when we think about Maine being the whitest state in the nation, this is only recent that I came to this analysis. It's a critical analysis, actually a tribal critical analysis, which is rooted in critical theory, and that's what I've been talking to students about this week. Is it, critical theory is pretty widely known. Critical race theory is widely known. Black civil rights activists who are attorneys developed critical race theory based on critical theory. And really, critical theory is rethinking the world around us. It's as simple as that, rethinking the world around us. And in university, that's what we do. We have to ground what we're teaching students in some body of theory, right? Otherwise, we're just training them. We're not educating them, So theory, when we go to get a PhD, for instance, we have to create new knowledge and develop original scholarly contributions. And it has to be rooted in bodies of theory. So when you think about that less than 1% of the professoriate being Indigenous peoples, right? So we have to go to that place of theory in order to be identified as experts in our field of study, so that we can teach, the upcoming practitioners, the teachers, people getting baccalaureate degrees, professionals, people getting master's degrees. We can teach the ideologies and the understandings that inform the policies and the laws. Because this policy here has never left us. It didn't live in a vacuum. It has a legacy today, and it informed subsequent educational policy against us as Maine Indian people. It informed how 2/3 of the state was illegitimately taken from us, that was confirmed by the United States Supreme Court, right? Because this didn't live in a vacuum. The money that was taken from this, was then used to purchase all of the oceanfront property in the state of Maine. 90% of the oceanfront property in the state of Maine, including the islands, which are all privately owned. There was a directive by Lieutenant Governor Doomer, D-U-M-M-E-R, he might be dumber, I don't know, but he enacted a mandate that said, for those that accomplish this, they get the first dibs at the prime real estate, oceanfront property. How many Maine Indians do you know that either have access or own oceanfront property? We have one little piece in Subic, and then Steuben, yep. Subic is actually how you say tide in our language. And then there's the Passamaquoddies that live in Sigayak, right? So that's just that critical economic theory. So critical theory is basically just rethinking the world around you, and it's like, if this podium were colonialism, it's like I would ask you to, critical theory would ask you to do this. You've got to look at it like you might have been looking at it this way all your life. And critical theory will say, no, you're going to come around here and look at it here. You're going to see that this podium has this. It's kind of consistent with our moose stories, huh? Have you heard those? John knows those moose stories. Or you're going to look at it from this angle. Oh, and then you see, I see where I am now. I'm at Senator George Mitchell. Then critical theory will even expect us to maybe climb up on the wall, get out of our comfort zone, and look down at this, right? Or come over here and look at it from this angle. So what Black civil rights activists, attorneys developed was critical race theory, which was looking at legal systems and policies intended to oppress Black people. And so one of a scholar, Brian Brayboy, developed tribal critical race theory, which says, we'll look at all the policies and the laws systematically that were created and intended to oppress Native people. And that's tribal critical race theory. So a lot of what I'm talking to you about today is rooted in tribal critical race theory and analysis, specifically Bunawapskig. Okay? So as I looked at this, I did some critical economic theory. I engaged with that, and I thought, how would you, calculate this in today's market? And a guesstimate of that calculation would be 50 pounds for a Penobscot male, live male. His scalp was worth 40. A woman, we can also see the roots of misogyny here. A woman was worth half. And a child, a 12-year-old child, scalp or their live person, what grade is a 12-year-old child in? Sixth grader. Brought in, either their scalp as evidence of them being killed, okay, was worth 20 pounds. So calculated in today's numbers, that's roughly 50 pounds for a live male Penobscot is about $45,000. That's a good down payment on a home, really nice SUV, maybe even buying a piece of land. Okay, so this is the place that I typically start off when I'm teaching pre-service teachers about the truth. And what that then does to impact socioeconomic distress, and has impacted socioeconomic distress factors for Indigenous peoples, right? And so when we were developing the curricular resources for the law back in 99, 2000, this happened, and I want to make sure. Hold on. When I was doing the analysis, I always had a picture of my late great grandmother and that bounty up over my computer, and this is another way in which tribal critical race analysis really guided my thinking. When I was writing my dissertation, is when I was sitting there in the depths of the analysis, I realized, oh my God, I had never put this together before. I used this for you moms in the audience that gave birth. Lots of us use a focal point when we're in labor. We just got to look at something, and I always kept this as my focal point when I deliver my babies. So it's just spiritually, it's very important to my thinking. This image of my late great grandma Elizabeth Andrews. And so I realized in the depths of my analysis in the dissertation of the document analysis of this is that my late great grandmother was the first generation to survive this bounty. So she had to have known, that, her mom, that they were running from that 1755 bounty, right? And so, it just further compelled what it was that I was doing. At the time that we were doing the think tank, and there were probably even people in this room that were there, my daughter was a kindergartner down at a school in southern Maine, and she received this reading buddy card that week, literally that week. And I called her in from the room and said, come in here, what is this? And she said, oh, that's the bad pirates killing the Indians. 4th grade reading buddy. She was a kindergartner at the time. Reading Buddies, by the way, is an awesome literacy program. Not in this case, though. And so I said, I was speechless, and she said, they're also playing this game at recess. It's called Kill the Indians. And she says, but I don't play because I'm a for real Indian, because the Indians are the kindergartners. And the 1st graders are the pirates, but Mama, not all the pirates are bad pirates. But they, this is what they're playing. And I'm still speechless. Good thing this isn't a lecture on parenting. But, and then I remember distinctly her looking up at me and asking me this, Mama, why do they want to kill us? She's including herself in that. She could see herself in that game being targeted. This is a hate crime. Right? It wasn't as well articulated, 15 years ago, but, it's a hate crime. And so she says, I think it's because they don't know enough about us. Literally that week, we were developing the curricular expectations, the essential understandings of what needed to be understood by a 12th grader with this law. And there was a tension. John alluded to it in his talk, but there was a tension about how you even teach about that bounty. And if we taught about it, there was a realistic concern, particularly by the Maine Indian teachers that were in that think tank. We had Maine Indian teachers, Maine Indian elders, people from the state commission, curricular design experts from the Commission of Education, as well as non-native teachers, a principal, there was a room maybe half of this size of people, of individuals. And the elders and the language revitalizers from the communities were really clear. They're unequivocally, they were like, of course we have to teach about it. And the teachers were like, oh no, I don't know. If we teach it, if we teach about this boundary, people aren't gonna wanna touch it, the law. They'll just ignore the law. Because the lovely knowledge about who we are, is so much more palatable than the difficult knowledge, right? And that's typically what's taken up, is the lovely knowledge. The dances, the songs, because it is beautiful, and that's who we really are as Native people. We're not that bounty. The socioeconomic distress, that's not really who we are. That's a system that's a system, a really messed up colonial oppressive system that has impacted us. But who we really are is, more of the lovely knowledge. But you can't really take that. It's like Rini Atian once said to us here at the university when I was an undergrad. She said to a panel of people, she was on a panel and she said to a group of people, she said, white people treat us like we're a convenience store. They want to just come in, take the M&Ms and leave all the cleaning products in the convenience store. The cleaning products are teaching about this bounding, right? And so this, had a positive influence in that, consensual decision that we needed to teach about the Mountie. We had to teach about the oppression in Maine's history, okay? And so, that's her at the time. She was in 5th grade. She was in kindergarten. She was about 5 years old, Okay, so when John says we're not supposed to be here, that's, the first time I heard that was when Mary Bassett said it, back in the early, mid-1980s to a group of Wabanaki youth. It's like for the Maine Indian people that are in this room right now, it's like literally we weren't supposed to be here. That was the first intention, right? But we certainly are here. Thank goodness. And what I'm also telling pre-service teachers is that all of what I've said, no one in this room is to be blamed for. It's no one's fault in this room. Like, I'm really clear with pre-service teachers. It's no one's fault here. No one is to be blamed for any of this. We do, however, have a responsibility. Especially as pre-service teachers, they've inherited a responsibility because they're joining a caring profession, a responsibility to mobilize the truth about what's happened, right? I asked them for a moment, imagine that you were never taught about slavery in the United States. Imagine, and the way that recess game was taken up by the headmaster of the school was like, oh, they're a nice family though, and he's a nice little boy. I said, I didn't question how nice that little boy is. I'm sure he's, precious, like every child is precious. I'm here because it's impacted us. And really the road to hell was paved with good intentions, right? I'm talking about the impact here. And so, and he was taking it very lightly, we could tell. And it was a 2-day negotiation with the headmaster to get him to, come up with a letter that I ended up constructing, which, went out to all parents saying that this game will not be tolerated. We have a zero tolerance policy. We have a zero tolerance policy at this school, and if any genocidal celebration of genocide or racist game like this is ever played again on our recess grounds or the like, it will lead to expulsion. Just that line was a 2-day negotiation, okay? And I knew that this, my husband said they played this when I was a kid. I said, yeah, they played this when I was a kid. You'd think that this would have been done and over with. But kids are getting these messages, and they still are. And so when my husband, we then said to the headmaster, if this was a game where the KKK was running around saying they were chasing the N-word, and hanging kids, or Jews, chasing Jews and putting them in concentration camps, it just would be taken so differently, but it's like normalized for us. because it's normalized in the media. 2016, we still have a movie that's only the Indians are doing the scalping, right? And so not only do I think that this compels my research, but it was also part and continues to be part of the driving rationale for why the Wabanaki Studies Law was created. I too have run into numerous people, like Auntie was saying how she went, that person did the survey. You know, there's people that don't even think that Indians, when they find out, I'm out west, okay? I happen to be visibly, you know, something, I could be Hawaiian, Asian, or Native, but you know, there's so many Indians out there that I mix in well, you know, like in my aesthetic, how I look. And when they find out that I'm from Maine, they, you know, people think that, oh, there's Indians out there? There's Native people out there? So when I say that, Maine's the whitest state in the nation, that's a really aesthetic, shallow analysis. Okay, so what I also always like to tell students is this quote by Maya Angelou, and my nephew Niall reminded me of this, so I put this up on this PowerPoint. History, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. You know, and I would invite you to think about if more of us were introduced to critical theory earlier on, more of the truth of what's happened on the territories on which we live and we occupy land, you know, I wonder if we would be in this mess right now with Trump. You know. Okay, so there's still lots of time though. Okay, so Maine is considered the whitest state in the nation. U.S. Census data indicates that Maine ranks in the nation for the highest percentage of white people. Which influences Indigenous invisibility. A more critical analysis indicates that Maine was successful at the near annihilation and marginalization of Wabanaki people. In my recent interactions with two educators, one an Indigenous scholar at an international conference and the second a teacher in Boston, they were surprised to learn that Maine still had Indigenous people. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I relayed those points to you. And I draw a lot on Wabanaki woman knowledge as I identify it. And the late Sipsis once told us as undergrads, or when we were organizing Irate, we had just, I think, done a demonstration or something, and she just looked over to us and she just got done feeding us cans of moose meat, and you know, she was teaching us in that moment. And she said, you know, it's really, you know, as Native people, we have to think about white people every day, and white people don't ever have to think about us. You know, and in this instance, people don't know what they don't know. And what I've explained to the pre-service teachers, well, how would you know about that bounty? It's not your fault. You know, how would you know? You know, like lots of them even still thought that Indians just go to school for free here. You know, parts of the lecture that I did this week was just dismantling that racist rhetoric and explaining. It's actually, the University of Maine was quite steadfast in 1972 when they enacted the North American Indian Tuition Waiver and Scholarship Program. It's how, I know I'm looking out in the crowd right now, I know that there's people here that really benefited from that. I know that our tribes, 40% of our tribal self-determination and governance structure is led by our own people, Maine Indian people, that conferred baccalaureate degrees, and they lived on the campus. So in 2009, the University of Maine system rips out the Room and Board Scholarship. Why? It's unjust, and it needs to be brought back. Okay, so, all right, I'm going to read a little bit from the paper. I have copies of the paper that I just published, and it's entitled Maine Indigenous Education Left Behind, a Call for Anti-Racist Conviction as Political Will Toward Decolonization. I'm just going to leave them up front here for after. If you want a copy, just take them.
Thank you.
And I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read a little bit from them so I can be concise, because I'm already out of time. And so I'm going to read the last two sections of the paper because it talks about some of. I'll put up the PowerPoint slides. Oh, I want to just read this last quote.
a professor of mine who's now teaching at the College of the Atlantic has at the end of her signature page on her email, her name is Bonnie. Darren, do you remember her last name? Okay, she's really phenomenal. But anyhow, at the end of her email signature, she has this quote, "Trying to change the world without changing our minds is like trying to clean the dirty face in the mirror by scrubbing the glass."
I think it's Bonnie Ty.
Bonnie Ty, thank you, that's her name. I learned a lot from her when I went to Harvard. Anyhow, that's her. That's not her quote. It's a Taiwanese philosopher, a Tulku. I'm not going to have time to take up all of this, but I do want you to see. I just want you to maybe it might contextualize what it is that I'm calling for here too. But generally, Maine Indian people have a 20 years shorter lifespan. We're 4 times more likely to be poor than non-Native people in Maine. And that is living below the poverty line, okay? And we're the least likely to be homeowners in our homeland. We're the most heavily legislated against group than any other group in North America. More laws have been written about us to address us as a problem than any other group. So when I say that I draw on Black civil rights activists' critical race theory, it's so relevant. It's such a great, theoretical space to engage from. So we know that in 2001, the state of Maine passed the Wabanaki Studies Law, requiring, that's a key word, requiring Maine K through 12 schools educate Maine school children about and thus increase public understanding of the Wabanaki people of Maine. This is the law, in its detail, what Darren was reading off from his phone. So Maine tribal governments and political systems and their relationship with local, state, national, and international governments, Maine Native American cultural systems, and the experience of Maine tribal people throughout history. That's the place from which that bounty can be taught about. Maine Native American territories, another place, and Maine Native American economic systems. Out of the Wabanaki Studies Commission, which my mother asked the question about the tribal government's input in this is key and of course foundational. At the time, the Wabanaki Studies Commission appointed John Barron, the Penobscot Tribal Nation. Within the Wabanaki Studies Commission, and the law calls for a commission to be put together in order to implement the law. It also calls for each tribe to have 2 designates, right? In order to reflect that tribal engagement, that tribal governance engagement. And that's manifested in those 2 appointments. And at that time, it was John Bear and I. And then the Passamaquoddies, and so on. And so we worked as a commission to develop the following recommendations. Basically, they're as follows. I'm going to paraphrase them as I talk. The law should be implemented in every school administrative unit in Maine. There should be vigorous efforts to get the word out about the law. The Wabanaki Studies Commission, which is a statewide steering process to support implementation, should continue beyond September 2003, at least for another year, it says. There should be ongoing efforts to develop and refine the framework for the Wabanaki Studies curriculum, also known as the concentrated areas of study. State and local educational assessment activities should include learning measurements. We need a way to assess this, which is, also yet to be done. There should be statewide and regional resource development and coordination. There should be ongoing in-service and pre-service professional development opportunities to help prepare educators to teach Wabanaki studies. There should be funding to help support the initial implementation, but nothing really ongoing. So to date, none of these have been fulfilled. Some of them have been partially fulfilled, but none of them have been fulfilled, right? Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit now from the paper. Scholars have identified the most effective way to prepare teachers for content delivery is logically their pre-service educational program. However, there are no compulsory American Indian education courses offered by any college of education in Maine. Currently, teachers in Maine, the University of Maine College of Education recently appointed me to a visiting professorship position to investigate the status of the Wabanaki Studies Law and identify barriers to and opportunities for compliance, which I'm sharing with you now. The position provided a critical opportunity to give attention to the Wabanaki Studies Law that has been identified by teachers and faculty as dormant. The visiting professorship was partly dedicated to examining the possibilities for a compulsory Indigenous education course here at UMaine for pre-service teachers in Maine. Logically, such a required content area necessitates an academic lead with expertise in American Indian education, preferably an Indigenous scholar, preferably a Wabanaki scholar. However, there is currently no funding for new faculty hires at the University of Maine for this particular type of position. If the College of Education creates a compulsory Wabanaki Studies education course, it would be among the first of its kind in the US, which is always good for a university. It's a good marketing mechanism, and it's a good integrity building standpoint. Currently, teachers in Maine are being certified without verifying their preparedness to comply with Wabanaki Studies Law. Those wishing to become certified teachers must take the national privatized praxis exam. Okay, so that praxis exam is one, next to the military and the pharmaceutical industry. It's the same company, okay, that puts out the GRE, the LSAT, okay. Over 40 of the 50 states use it, over 40. So I think I heard someone on the panel say it was half. No, it's over 40 of the 50 states are using the praxis exam. So it's not developed by scholars that are teaching pre-service teachers. And for states to have their own certification process is a huge financial burden. They have to develop their whole system, but it's doable. They can do it, right? And maybe it's not as financially burdensome as has been reported to me. I don't know. For the elementary education certificate, the 4 praxis exams cover reading, language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. This is a national exam, mind you, okay? Indigenous content is not tested in any area of the praxis. And the exam is not aligned with state-specific expectations, policies, or laws regarding teachers' content delivery. Sitting for the praxis exam, however, requires a bachelor's degree in education, which we do have the authority, in our public universities to have control over the content, right, of what pre-service teachers are learning. Thus, development of compulsory university-level Indigenous education is the hopeful space where pre-service teachers might find capacity building for compliance with the Wabanaki Studies Law. The Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission objectives provided a significant opportunity for schools to comply with the Wabanaki Studies Law as well. The 2015 Maine TRC report considered high rates of placement of Indigenous children in non-native foster homes to be an instance of cultural genocide, of course. Quote, we interpret this information within a web of interconnected causes, including the presence of institutional racism in state systems and the public. The report specifically recommends Wabanaki Studies Law as a possible means to address damages done by genocide and theft of Wabanaki children. Quote, develop ways to expand on the work of LD 291 so there's an enlarged understanding of bias and genocidal practices in the greater community of Wabanaki state relations are held in a broader framework. The state's commitment to reconciling efforts with the tribes through the Maine TRC and compliance with Wabanaki Studies Law is a practical method of taking anti-racist action to support the self-determination of the Wabanaki. So you think about self-determination, how we govern ourselves, our capacity to govern ourselves. So with the forced removal of our peoples in the early 1800s from this territory to Indian Island, which was our burial site, our ancestral burial site, and then in 200 years later for the University of Maine system, I think in a steadfast effort in 1972 to implement the tuition waiver and scholarship, meant for a lot of us, to be able to live on campus. When you think about those poverty rates, we're 4 times more likely to be poor. So oftentimes we've got, 5 to 6, 7 people living in a 2 to 3 bedroom home with 1 bathroom. Our kids need to be able to live here too in order to be successful in school. And since 2009, we know that there's been a drop in enrollment. And we have lots of anecdotal data that tells us that it's because they can't live on campus, because the room and board scholarship has been removed. Okay, so as Wabanaki people, we hoped the Wabanaki Studies Law would begin to critically address our people's racist experiences. We must purposefully engage anti-racism when expanding knowledge systems and teacher education programs. Otherwise, only the M&Ms will be addressed, the lovely knowledge, right? This space of engagement must prioritize difficult knowledge. Anti-racist conviction calls for non-Wabanaki people and institutions to hold up a mirror to their own history and identify the benefits inherited from colonialism. The benefits inherited from colonialism. So that doesn't say it's your fault and you're to blame. It's acknowledging, okay, these are the benefits from the colonialism. Okay, let's do the right thing and reinstitute that room and board scholarship. Let's do the right thing and make sure we teach about this in a compulsory manner in our pre-service program. That's anti-racist conviction. It takes a certain amount of political will in order to get there, right? Calling for equitable democracy, Brayboy, Costago, and Mohan offer key questions. How is our life tied with the lives of others? How is our privilege at someone else's expense? How are the decisions we make tied to the well-being of others, no matter how removed by race, nationality, or geography? Supported by this level of anti-racist conviction, Wabanaki Studies Law creates opportunities to hold up such mirrors. And catalyze social and political change, to hold up the mirrors and catalyze social and political change. Okay. Otherwise, as Telku warns, trying to change the world without changing our minds, remember, is like trying to clean the dirty face in the mirror by scrubbing the glass. Political will of statewide insistence on complying with teacher Wabanaki studies in K through 12 Maine schools would be a start. The Wabanaki Studies Law was developed to provide greater understanding, respect, and appreciation for the Wabanaki. That's embedded in the law. Many of us hoped, I talked about that, an important population of Maine teachers are taking up the legislation. Okay. We've heard about it in southern Maine. I know that there are other places, certainly on Indian Island, I know it's being taken up. An important population, okay, so they came to spaces of political will. So those teachers, those non-native teachers that are taking up the law came to spaces of political will that I'm talking about. With either through building relationships with Indigenous peoples or through their own anti-racist education, who knows? And this is what I want to hang my hope on. And gratitude upon Mi'kmaq scholar Dr. Marie Batiste compels us to acknowledge that such spaces require the decolonizing of both the mind and the heart. And decolonizing is all about that critical theory, seeing something in a different way, rethinking the world around you as you've always known it, rethinking the world and rethinking what you understand about colonialism. She writes, teaching is the psychology of hope, and hope is cause and a consequence of action. Teaching creates the infrastructure of the art of the impossible. No book that criticizes the faults of an education system can end without consideration of what concerned and sensitive educators can do to affect positive outcomes for those affected by this flawed system. So I've done a strong critique of the system. And my point in sharing this quote with you is that we've got some really incredible teachers out there. You know, there is some stuff, really important stuff happening. And a lot of it is teacher self-educating, you know, or finding someone like James, you know, because even the website for the Maine state was dormant until this summer. The website for curricular resources, okay? Non-Native people can be effective at impacting social and political change for Indigenous peoples if their anti-racist conviction is backed up by an understanding of how they benefit from colonial structures of oppression. They are grounded in conviction, and where I come from, that is walking your talk. Making a law is a metaphoric talk, and now it's time to walk the law. I call on the state of Maine to assert the political will required to fulfill its legislative commitments. This isn't the first time the following recommendations, I'm going to share with you some of the recommendations I came up with, but I make a real point because they wanted me in the manuscript, they said, Rebecca, you've got to make some recommendations. And I said, well, we had the recommendations. And I remember writing, Wabanaki people are tired of repeating ourselves with little to no follow-up from non-Native leaders. Many call themselves allies to Indigenous peoples in Maine, yet Wabanaki Studies Law has been left behind. So achieving the following recommendations for decolonization in Maine will again necessitate political will, as I've stated, which I identify as relying heavily on anti-racist conviction. Wabanaki scholars and community members have identified the following goals. So these aren't just my recommendations, I'm drawing on other recommendations that I compiled in the process of my study. As necessary to comply with Wabanaki Studies Law. Sustain, this is, I think I put it in the PowerPoint slide. Sustain an initiative at the University of Maine to investigate and ensure enactment of the Wabanaki Studies Law, reinstate the Wabanaki Studies Commission with state funding, university support, and an American Indian education scholar as chair, create compulsory courses in pre-service teacher education programs at Maine colleges and universities, revise licensure requirements, testing measurements to ensure Maine teachers demonstrate a readiness to comply with Wabanaki Studies Law. And lastly is that restoration of the Room and Board Scholarship for Native American students at the University of Maine to support future cohorts. And what I dream and envision is that we have cohorts of Indigenous teacher education program where they can go through the pre-service teacher program together, maybe even live in the wing of a dorm together, right? We know, the research tells us over and over again that the likelihood of Indigenous student success increases dramatically when they can be in cohorts, particularly in predominantly white institutions like this. Because all of their classes, when they can live together, be together, when they're going to go get in those classes, they're likely to be one of the only, maybe 2 students in their classroom. So there's lots of room for integration. But those cohorts have been proven to dramatically impact academic success factors, especially when they can live together, right? And there are barriers to that, okay? So, enactment of this blueprint for decolonization and justice will result in significant improvements for Wabanaki self-determination, tribal-state relations, equity, and precedent-setting tribal-state initiatives to be used as a national model. Maine was the second in the state. Montana was the first one to have their law. My publication appears in a special edition of the American Indian Education Journal. It's an A-listed, peer-reviewed academic journal. It's the oldest American Indian education journal in North America. Scholars from the state in Montana wrote a similar article about their law. And across the board, there's, I think, 6 other states that have some sort of policy or law now. Each of those Indigenous peoples to that state, contributed to this journal, like I did. And as I was sitting in back, it just got emailed to me this morning, a template of the journal. And I'm reading in the preface, the editors of that journal say that across the board nationally, there's no state that's complying with it. And all of these Indigenous scholars that are writing from, what's happening in their states are saying the same thing, basically. Not the same thing, but just in different ways. Okay. So, I just want to end with a little something. Is that a Tumi or Jibano Koma? Tumi. So Tumi there? That's my baby, Tumi. And I was just starting my work Oh no, I was on the, we were doing this work on the Wabanaki Studies law when he was a baby, and this is his great grandma out west. I want to show you who we really are. And I love these images, but I kind of want to. When I talk about students and pre-service programs, I said, think about how you know what you know. You know, that's basically, there's a big heady academic word called epistemology. You know, you've got to really think about how do you know what you know? How do you know what you know about Indians? How do you know what you know about caring and even teaching? You know, who's your favorite teacher? Why are they your favorite teacher? Think about them all the time as you're getting your pre-service teacher, your baccalaureate degree. Try to be like them. Why were they your favorite? You know? And so when I explain intergenerational trauma and I explain intergenerational love knowledge transfer, I like to show this. This is, in my family, this is Bonawubskig knowledge of love. You know, the affection that we have for our babies, for each other. And, because, you know, of the people that went to the Indian Industrial School, the Carlisle School, which was the first Indian residential school in North America, of all the tribes documented, and maybe the documentation might be off, but the Penobscot Indians were taken from Indian Island and sent to that school in higher numbers than any other group in Maine, tribe. And within the past 10 years, they've actually found children buried under that Indian residential school, where the policy was kill the Indian in order to save the man. You know, so that epistemology, that way of knowing and being about who we are, you know, there's an intention to eradicate that. And I put that in the literature as being like epistemicide, to take that, the intention to take that way of knowing and being away. You know, so for us to, like, epistemicide's not complete, and this is evidence of that too, okay? So, that's in a hospital. I think that's Jeepanuk though, huh? Yeah, that's Jeepanuk. That's my third baby. So, Jeepanuk, I named my dissertation Red Hope, and that's, yeah. And that's Red Hope in the language is Jeepanuk. It's the east. Yeah. And as I was writing this stuff, I was getting so, like, you know, I was writing about racism. How do we survive racism? How do we survive genocide? And I was on the phone with my mom. I talk to her every day, and she says, oh, late Jim Sapp had asked her if she would, they had this wounded eagle that was going to take its first flight, and he had asked her to, you know, she was the eldest on council, and she continued to be, I think, anyhow, she was really nervous. She was on the phone that she was going to drop it. It was going to drop. She said, oh my God, you know, to tell you the truth, Rebecca, you know, I think I'm worried that I'm going to drop it. So the next morning, I'm thinking about her. You know, my stepfather, Jack Loftus, took these pictures that I'm about to show. He's a retired professional photographer. Buffy, can you raise your hand? This is the photographer of these pictures. And somewhere, my brother Mark, the vice chief of the Penobscot Nation now, we didn't have texting. There was no cell phone back then. But he called me, and he says, oh, did you hear what happened? And I said, no, what? Mama dropped that eagle. And he's also notorious for being a big fat liar. So when I talked to her, you know, she actually, you know, told me, she goes, it was the most miraculous thing, you know, she said that she'd experienced, because that eagle just went. So when Darren says that, you know, he wants me to be permanent, I'm here. We're still here. That's the Jeepanuk, the Red Hope. You know, and we are, as you can see in this panel, there are people that have committed their life to this, and it's not going away. You know, maybe we're even here and we're better equipped to be here, huh, John? Like, we've learned a lot more since, you know, in the past 18 years. The law's been dormant, but we haven't been. So, you know, there's a new, I think that there's a new and renewed hope for what's about to happen and what is happening right now. So that's the note that I want to end on. And I asked my auntie and my mother to just come up here. Marlene and I and Niall, if you want to come join us, we're going to sing an honor song for these women that have led these initiatives and honor the ancestors that struggled and suffered so much in order for us to be here. And specifically, you know, my aunt and my mom do a lot of this work together and influence each other. As much as they might disagree, they also influenced each other. And they certainly influenced my scholarly work. And so let's end there, and then we can go to the lunch, Darren, hey?
It's just a reception.
A reception, or, okay.
Yeah. There's food here.
Okay, and then we'll just have our food.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mama and Auntie and Molly and Niall, we'll sing the longest walk for them. Wanna come join me? Is it okay to stand? Yeah. Okay, if you're able to, you can join us in standing. You don't have to though. If you want to sit, you're welcome to sit. And I just invite you to, you know, no matter who we are in this room, there was someone way before us that prayed for our well-being. Okay, no matter who you are in this room, there was someone way before you that prayed for your future, your well-being. And you know, it's with that I want to honor these elders, you know, and I say that with a capital E, in our community, and the work that, and the pathways that they've opened for us. And to be reminded that no one in this room is to be blamed for anything that I said, no one's fault, but it's our collective responsibility. And I want to pray for that, pray for the intention of that, and the current work that's being done that these women have led and influenced so heavily, okay? So however you pray or whatever, you just think that way, I guess. This is how we pray, you know, and this is also like reminds us that the epistemicide's not complete. Okay, the song is the longest walk, and that's probably another lecture. But it's a song that honors, you know, the suffering. Okay.
Hey
Hey,